More than anything, James City County is about people. The people and their communities that have shaped 4 centuries of history and leave behind a trail for future generations to explore.
Okay, I'm Frances Ann Huckstep Hamilton. I was here all my life, except for a couple years in Toanna, 9 months in Baltimore when my husband was in school, and anyway, a year at Mary Washington. Otherwise, I was home. I've been around here all my life. My mother came with her family from Iowa. They were part of the Norwegian group that came, and they came because of my grandmother's health. And she came with them, of course. She was a twin. There were 7 in her family also. And there was a baby, and then I guess the older boys were about 20. And they all came here. And then my father was from up in the mountains near Madison, in that area. And he was a telegrapher at Richmond. And during World War I, they shipped him to Norge. And of course he had to have a place to room and board because they worked shift work. And he did that at my grandmother's house. Well, he happened to meet my mother there. And therefore, they married, and then they stayed here. He quit telegraphy, and he owned the store for a while.
Well, Grove, as you know, we have quite a few trailers, mobile homes, little pockets of mobile homes. And when I came to James City and I moved into Grove, I bought a tract of land from an old gentleman. And right beside me was a officer from Newport News. At the time, the black soldiers were not allowed to live on the post, and so they lived out in the community. So Grove, there was quite a few of them living in Grove. This one lieutenant had a house he had built, and he first bought this tract of land beside the tract that I purchased, and he had a small mobile home, very small mobile home trailer, and he decided to build a house, so he built himself a home there, and he rented the trailer, and I guess the income looked pretty good to him. So he enlarged it. At the time, trailers were very small, as you know, back in the 70s. So he bought quite a few trailers stuck there. It's a little small mobile home park right beside my house. I guess that's what the major change, and so other folks kind of followed suit. There were other people that set up, bought tracts of land, set up little small mobile homes.
Well, actually, I lived in the historic area, down near the old jail, until I was about 9, 10 years old, until 1956. And my family moved out then. So I was born in 47, moved out of the historic area in 56. So the Capitol was my playground, interspersed with and ran over tourists at least once a day on my bicycle. And it was fun. It was a great place to grow up. And not a real sense of the history or the hypocrisy, quite frankly, of growing up in a town dedicated, commemorating a democracy, a sense of freedom that, in all candor, was not applicable to me in the 50s. But it was great, a great time. My sister and I loved it.
Most of us had to work. There wasn't any question about it. The only time that we would gather any time at all would be Saturday afternoon, and we probably went to the ball field because if we had a little sandlot team, we watched the sandlot team play, or else we'd play ourselves. For instance, when I went to Toanna High School, we had a baseball team. I believe we had the pants and the shirt, I think, was our uniform. Our basketball team, we didn't have basketball uniforms. Everybody played in swim trunks and a T-shirt. That was a basketball outfit. We didn't have a football team at all, no kind. But we played football in recess, ourselves. But we didn't have any helmets, anything else, any protection at all. Bump heads pretty good then too, back then. But Saturday afternoon, most people were somewhere near where a baseball game was going on, if it was spring or later or during the summer and so forth. And Sunday afternoon was about the same thing versus visiting. Everybody went to church on Sunday morning. You didn't have to worry about where you go be on Sunday morning. And that was, everybody went because that's where you saw all your friends at for the week. Hadn't seen them all week, and you see them all there. And I mean, you just didn't walk to church and get in your A model car. You walked to the church and talked. Everybody talked about an hour and a half before they'd come home. And normally somebody would come to somebody else's house for Sunday afternoon, and you'd sit on the front porch and watch, see if a car went by. And because you'd know who that was. You'd say, "That goes so-and-so down the road, wonder where they're going," because if more than 3 cars went by, there was something going on, But that was a Sunday afternoon thing. You'd sit on the front porch and watch for the cars go by. But during the week, we didn't never go anywhere much during the week, nights or anything like that. And we didn't have school activities or anything. We did have baseball games in the afternoon, and so we'd stay after school for that.
I fell in love with a guy who was in law school here, and so we moved here while he finished his senior year in law school, and his family was nearby, and so Williamsburg seemed just the right place to start, and we never wanted to leave because my husband was really active in Williamsburg as well as on the peninsula, having grown up in Seaford and Yorktown. So he went that way, and I sort of migrated toward the Richmond side of things because I'd go up there to keep up with my family there and be enriched by some good speakers and programs that they had up there. And I also worked up there after we were married because I had begun modeling, and I didn't want my husband as a law student to have to pay for his own Christmas gifts and things, so I wanted to pick up a little extra money that I could shop with, and so I enjoyed going through that end and got familiar with Toano and the wonderful people up there, Sam Hazelwood among them, and Hammond Branch, and the whole Stuart Taylor family. I just began to relate to the whole community, and so Yorktown and Newport News, and I just have been sort of regionally oriented from natural travels up and down the highway. He loved building homes and building pretty places, and he built this home, and we just enjoyed it so much. It was first a center section and one wing, and then we knew we'd ultimately want to add this part, and this room has been a practice room for bands, for recordings, for youth groups coming to sing, for Sing Out Williamsburg up with people.
My grandfather came from Norway. My grandmother was the second generation. Her mother had come across in 1844 on a sailboat with 5 children. Can you imagine? And they settled in the Midwest, and that's where she stayed. Well, there were 2 stores in Norge. One was a general merchandise. You could buy suits. They had the post office in there. They had a bank in there. And you could buy more or less household things and groceries. Whereas my grandfather's store, which was across the street, it was supposed to be a hardware, or it was a hardware store where you could buy, things for your horses because, of course, then there were no cars to travel in. And there were a number of people in the area that died of tuberculosis. And so many of them died of TB at a young age. Then there were older ones too. But it was quite an epidemic.
We get so many, transit people to come in, stay a little while, and move out. But in Grove, most of the senior, very few of the original property owners are still there. We have new people come in. They're really not, many times they're not that interested in being a part of the community. They just come in. Some of them work Newport News, work other places.
My dad worked for Colonial Williamsburg 30 years with Colonial Williamsburg. For most landscape for a while. For most of the while was a janitor for CW. In fact, my favorite CW story, one of my favorite stories of my father. We lived on Nicholson Street, and on the corner of Nicholson and I think it's Body Tot, I'm not sure, there's this big field where James City County Training School once sat it, and that was back in the, I guess, 20s and 30s, the school, the high school anyway, for African Americans. But it was a vacant field when I was a kid, and we played football in it. But when they were filming the story of the Patriot for Colonial Williamsburg, the film that they show at the Information Center, they kept all the animals in that field, and my father sort of moonlighted and helped in terms of keeping the animals for CW, and made a fair amount of extra cash, which he used to buy a piece of property up in Lyford.
Well, everybody had electricity but me, because we lived across the tracks. And they didn't have electricity down there. And we didn't have running water because there was a lovely spring. And you could take a glass and get a drink of water out of the pipe that came out of the bank. It was in a little cistern, and you put your glass under there and take it out, and it would frost up. That's how cold it was.
When I was going to school, our basketball court was in the Tawana Community House, and now the Tawana Community House has a ceiling in it. When we were going to school, it was the Tawana Women's Club. The Women's Club built that, and it didn't have any ceiling in it. It had big trusses. It had big cross members in it, which was probably, and I can't remember exactly, but those trusses was probably 9-10 feet off of the floor, and they were probably 10 to 12 feet apart, be a cross member, and those timbers were maybe 8x8 or 10x10s or something like that. And the basketball goal was a little lower than those timbers, but unless you happened to be right at the goal, you had to shoot over the cross members to get the basket. And sometimes we'd win some games because they wasn't accustomed to shooting over top of it or getting underneath of it.
Well, life, trust me, was a very different place in 1956 than it is today. I was taken aback. My sister and I were taken aback by how far out it was from the downtown metropolis of 1950s Williamsburg that we'd grown up in. Cornfield, and for the private from Mr. Levi Wallace, and it was much more rural than it is today, obviously. But between the Outlets Mall and Prime Outlets, about halfway in between there. But it was fun. I'm great friends still this day. Great friends today, or playmates as I was a young person and a teenager. But it was Little League Baseball, typical childhood. Superimposed with that childhood is, by that time, you're becoming more and more aware of, wait a minute, there's in effect, two school systems, and the drive-in theater is segregated. there's there's affluence and there's poverty in this town, and those decisions seem to be made based more on race than on individual effort. But that aside, it was great growing up here. It was a great place then. I think it's a great place now.
The curve now that comes around in front of the Toano Community Center used to be, when I was in school, real sharp curve. And practically every day, somebody would turn over a car there. And so when the car turned over, particularly us in grade school, because, see, we didn't have air conditioning in school or anything, we'd all jump out the window because the teacher couldn't control us. So somebody had a wreck, and one of those screens on the window, and the windows up, hot as blazes, man, we'd roll right out of the windows. The ones in the second floor couldn't jump out, because it was too darn high, but we'd roll out. But what she was talking about, I was pretty rapid with automobile when I was young, because I was about the only one who had one, and I was kind of a show off with it. But I remember we'd come around that curve, drop to the left, and this service station has got the canopy out front with two square pillars out there, and it's just about 10 feet through there, and we'd drop off to the left, come through that thing about 40 miles an hour and make a right turn and go back out. And Mr. Anderson used to run that service station. That was Frank Anderson's daddy, and which is now Jimmy Anderson's great-granddaddy, which Jimmy Anderson used to own Anderson's Corner up here, which now is retired. So this is back quite a few years ago. 50 years ago or more. But he'd come up with that daggone pistol and he'd shooting, he'd bang, you'd hear that thing going off back, and boy, we'd be smoking or going up the road, We'd come right through that service station about 40 miles an hour.
We had May Days, which was a big day. And all through school, each grade would do some particular dance, or depending on what the theme was. Like if it was springtime, it was always, early in the spring. May is, of course. And you would have different themes, and you do either dances or recitations or dramatizations, whatever. And of course there was always a May Queen who was a senior, and she had a court, and they were all dressed in beautiful dresses, and then they had the maypole dance, and the girls were dressed in pretty dresses, and they went around the maypole. And then when it came my turn in the 7th grade, World War II was here, and everything was quieted. We couldn't do a lot of things because the war was on. So I didn't get to dance the maypole. I was really disappointed.
As I say, growing in Richmond with my dad, and he was superintendent of music in the Henrico County schools. And so I was always, or he was playing for a recital, and he played at the mosque for the Virginia Education Association, that wonderful big organ. I have some pictures of him there. And so the music side was always there. And then he got me interested in the production, the stage things, because he'd have these massive groups of people like Suzanne McCory does at Toano now, just including all sorts of children who never have the chance to do that sort of thing later, unless they just catch the bug and somehow continue to volunteer for choirs and Williamsburg Players or various community theaters wherever they move. But
Bruton Heights High School, off 2nd Street in the city, I think certainly one of the great institutions in this state, if not in this country. And I say that with some bias, but not a whole lot. When you look at its alumni and the impact that it had on the community, it was absolutely a great and special place to go to school. DJ Montague was the principal, and the faculty. Interestingly, the faculty was very well educated, graduate education in some of the best institutions in this country, Cornell, Columbia, NYU.
Yeah, I remember well that my mother and my grandmother would speak Norwegian when they didn't want me to hear what they were saying. I particularly remember that. But they were not anxious to teach Norwegian to the children, which, I regret. I would give anything to be able to speak Norwegian. I picked up a few words. That was, thank you, you're welcome, and something like that. And I could count to 10, but they wanted to be good Americans, so they tried to not speak the language unless they were with their own kind, and they spoke then. Well, the fast trains, there were 6. There were 2 in the morning that one went east and one went west. And the same thing in the afternoon. And at night, there was an 8 and 9 o'clock train. And I think that's the reason we didn't need watches, because we knew when the train went through at 11 that it was about time to go home for lunch. And when the 4 o'clock train went through, you better think about going home, and you didn't stay out very late if it was the 8 or 9 o'clock train. But there were freight trains that took the coal down and then brought the empty coal cars. And then when there were freight cars, and sometimes they would stop in Norge and, let the baggage off or the whatever. And they would get fertilizer sometimes, and they would have to unload it, and then the farmers would come pick it up. They usually put that on the side track because it would have to stay there for a while so the farmers could unload it.
Yeah, well, I'm a Baptist. I born, my family were Baptists, and I grew up in the Baptist church. When I came to Williamsburg, I joined Mount Gilead Baptist Church, and we had it was a very small church. We had a minister from Charles City, Reverend Massey, was a pastor at the time. He had 2 other churches. He had 2 churches in Charles City and the one here in Williamsburg. So he would, we only had service like a couple of times a month. And when he passed away, Reverend Morgan became the pastor, and he was also the chaplain at Eastern State Hospital. So under his leadership, myself and another gentleman in the community who's a pretty good carpenter, and he does plumbing and does a little bit of all of the building trades. We put a big addition on the back of the church, the educational center we call, on the back of our church, which serves as a dining room and classrooms. We use it as classrooms and other facilities.
It was the center, really. I mean, they had a bank up there. They had any number of stores and a drugstore. And they went, I guess, from fixing buggies to fixing cars. Because many people, before there was a Norge Depot, they arrived in Toanna, and then they had to get a wagon or a buggy to take them wherever they were going.
I really enjoy waking up each day and having a new day to play with. And I've been so blessed. I think it's important to help people realize that as early as you can have a vision or a plan for what you'd like to do in your life, and not just be, you do have a purpose. You're here, and you might as well do something. And if it can be an affirmative thing, well, all the better. And it can be if you look for it. But I got there by saying I always wanted to be a homemaker. And I had married this wonderful guy who was a good provider and would and encouraged me to do things in the community because I didn't have to do a 9-to-5 job. And that's unusual, but it's really a blessing because it means that, you can spend your time sort of filling in the gaps that are left when people don't have the time.